Welcome to the It's in Queens podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Simmons, and this is the only podcast that focuses on Queens. This podcast comes to you thanks to the Queens Economic Development Corporation and the Queens Tourism Council. Together, they work to showcase Queens as a destination full of unique experiences, cultural gems, and opportunities for everyone who lives here, who works here, or who visits from near or far. Queens is the most diverse area in the United States, home to people from more than 190 countries who speak hundreds and hundreds of languages. This incredible diversity is supported by a wide network of nonprofits that serve the borough's many communities, offering everything from social services to arts programs to housing assistance. Nonprofits play a crucial role in strengthening the fabric of our city, ensuring that all residents have access to the resources that they need to thrive. And among the many communities in Queens are Holocaust survivors, a group whose resilience and history must be honored and supported. Organizations like Selfhelp Community Services play a vital role in ensuring that survivors receive the care and companionship they deserve. Selfhelp's Holocaust Survivor Program connects volunteers with survivors, fostering friendships and reducing social isolation through regular home visits. Beyond its work with Holocaust survivors, Selfhelp provides essential services to older adults and vulnerable New Yorkers, offering home care and affordable housing and technology training to help people stay independent. But volunteers, they are the lifeblood of organizations like Selfhelp. They offer their time, compassion, and so much more to make a tangible difference in people's lives. And one such volunteer is Robert Stein, who has been part of Selfhelp's Holocaust Survivor program for some time now. He joins us today to share his experience, discuss the impact of this program, and talk about why volunteering is such a meaningful way to give back. Robert Stein, welcome to the It's in Queens podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of it.
Let me start off by getting to know you first and how you first got involved with Selfhelp Community Services and their Holocaust Survivor program.
Yes, well, I'm a New Yorker, native New Yorker, born in Queens and in Rego Park, 63rd Road. And I've always been interested in Jewish history, Holocaust history. I don't have any direct relatives that I know of that perished in the Holocaust, but of course, as a Jewish person, you learn about it, you hear stories, you go to exhibits, you see movies. It's in the ether. So it's been a subject that's always been in my wheelhouse of interest. And about 2 years ago, I took a trip to Poland and Israel with a group called the Museum of the Holocaust for with an organization called March of the Living. And it's a Holocaust remembrance and history trip where we go to different cities in Poland, including Warsaw and Krakow and Lublin. And we see some of the camps, we see some of the ghettos, we learn about the Jewish history in these areas before and after the war. And there's a very big moving event at Auschwitz where thousands of people from all over the world come and pay their respects. And also there's a music and a speaker program. And it's quite inspirational to see young people from Argentina, Panama, taking time out of their lives. And it's a big trip. It's not an easy trip to go there. And there's also a march from Auschwitz to Birkenau. So it was a very moving experience. And I met a lot of people who were what they call 2G survivors, meaning their parents or relatives survived the Holocaust. It was really a 2G trip, but not everybody on the trip, including me, was a 2G person. And then when I came back from the trip to New York, I continued my knowledge and interest in the Holocaust subject. And I'm a member of the Museum of Jewish Heritage here in downtown Manhattan. And I always pay attention to what's coming up. And they had a program called Witness Theater, which was a very moving theatrical experience where they brought young people together to dramatize the survivor stories. And in this one particular show, they actually had survivors on the stage with the young people sharing their stories. And it was quite inspirational to see these people who are, they're in their 80s, people who maybe survived the Holocaust and got out in 1945 are quite up there now, but they were there participating, and I got the program for the theater group, and I was reading about the organizations that were sponsoring it, and one of them was Self-Help, and I said, "Oh, I never heard of this group." So, of course, I Googled Self-Help. Selfhelp.net, by the way, is their website, and I started to read about their services, and one of the uh, options was a volunteer program. And I've been um, in a place in my life where I'm not in a full-time job, but I'm still interested in staying engaged with work and volunteer work. And I thought, well, let me see what they have of what their needs are. And they had this program called the Friendly Visitor Program. And I thought, well, that's something that I probably could do. And I've never really had like that one-on-one volunteer experience. I don't do other volunteer work, but I thought, well, let me look into it. So I applied and filled out paperwork, and I guess they checked some references, and I was approached and they said, "Would you like to be part of the program?" And I said, "Absolutely." So there was a training process where we had an online training program to help us learn how to deal with people who are dealing with trauma and various issues that might come up that you should be sensitive towards. And I participated in that, and I waited patiently till I got a placement, and I got a placement. And they reached out to me and they said, "We have this man who lives in Forest Hills. He's 99. His name is Albert Nadler. He's a Holocaust survivor from Transylvania." And I said, "Absolutely." So this was back in October. So I called him up, and he lives on his own in his apartment, but he has 24-hour aides that help him out. And we set up our first appointment, and I think I've visited him maybe about 14 times since then, including today. I was there this afternoon for about an hour and a half.
And talk about as part of the Holocaust Survivor Program, what Albert is like. Talk about that first meeting and what this whole experience has been like for you and for him.
Yeah, well, so I set up the meeting, and I took the subway out to Queens, the 71st Street and Forest Hills stop. And I showed up, and his son and daughter-in-law happened to be there. They were in town to celebrate his birthday. He was about to celebrate his birthday the day after I was visiting, but his family had come and they celebrated the day before. So there were um, streamers on the wall and balloons, and it was a kind of a festive environment. So I got to meet him, and turns out he wrote a memoir with his daughter-in-law called Crossing the Water, Body and Soul. And he presented me with a memoir. He signed it. And of course, I took it home and read it. It's a short read, but a very interesting read. And we sat together and we talked, and I tried to get a sense of like what he might need. And he's 99, so he can walk, but it's cold, in the winter. So we really have just stayed in his apartment since I've been visiting him. But it was an interesting experience too, because we got to talking with his son, and one thing led to another. And his son said, "Oh, what did you do, or do you work?" And I said, "Well, actually, I used to work at a company named HBO, which of course everyone knows HBO." And it turns out one of his neighbors on the seventh floor of his building is somebody that I used to work quite closely with at HBO. So turns out we have this in common, and he's been friends with her for many years. And she's actually come down to visit with him while I'm there. So we've had some like group visits, and it's nice because I haven't seen Tracy in many years since we both left. But let's see. It's a really rewarding experience. He's a talker. He likes to talk. He likes to share stories. We look through photo albums together. He's got a whole bookcase of photos from his childhood to trips to Israel, weddings, all sorts of vacations. He and his wife used to travel twice a year to all over the world. They have one son who lives in, his wife's passed away, unfortunately, several years ago, but they used to travel all the time. One of his sons lives in Japan, so they've been to Japan. He talks about trips to Egypt and Israel and Thailand, all over the place. And we sit and we talk. I ask him about his week. We were reading a book for a little while, but then I think we kind of both lost interest in the book. I've shared photos from my trip to Poland and Israel from the March of the Living trip with him on my iPad.
You mentioned reading the memoir. How did it shape your understanding of his life and your friendship with him?
Well, it gave me a clearer picture of his life. So the memoir has really given me a more full, complete understanding of his life. He grew up in a little town called Oradea in Transylvania. He considers himself a Hungarian, but I believe his town was technically in Romania. But his parents were Hungarian, and he grew up speaking Hungarian.
Tell me about a meaningful moment that you've shared with Albert during your visits because you've developed such a strong connection.
This is something that where he's just focused on sharing time together with me, sharing stories. I remember one story I asked him about hobbies he had, and he told me an interesting story about how he and his friends would collect silkworms and then watch them turn into cocoons and then become moths. And he writes about it in the book too, and I always thought that was an interesting kind of metaphor for what his life was like, where, he starts off one way, he kind of gets bound by the Nazis. He was imprisoned, he was captured and imprisoned for about a year, over a year. And then he survived and flourished. His unfortunately his parents and sister perished in the Holocaust, but he um, was liberated from I think Bergen-Belsen in 1945. And then, like, moth or a butterfly, he kind of flourished and took off and flew. And I thought that was an interesting hobby that he remembered and stuck with him because when I think of his life, it kind of felt like a real metaphor for his journey.
So, on so many of these episodes, my guests would like to promote a book or an event that they're hosting. I don't often get the opportunity to interview someone who can talk about volunteerism and why it's important to volunteer. So, I want to just get into that for a moment.
Sure.
How has volunteering impacted you personally? And have there been any unexpected lessons or rewards? Because I would love listeners to take something away from this too, and hopefully then to volunteer with self-help.
Well, I think volunteering is great if you have the time and the passion. I've done a lot of volunteer work in New York through New York Cares Volunteer Match. And this organization I found on my own, but I feel like it's an opportunity for people who have some flexibility in their schedule because each week Albert and I sit together with his helper and we look at my calendar, his calendar, and say, when's a good time? So it's great for people who have a flexible schedule. And I think it's important to give back. There's so many people out there that need help. And I would have never encountered Albert. He's home all the time. He can't get around as easily as he used to. As a matter of fact, he is 99. He was working till his mid 90s. He was going into an office in Manhattan, not at 5 days a week, but so he's an inspiration to me. And he's also someone who's always thinking ahead. Like he's working on a novel with a woman about it's a romantic novel set in Egypt. I mean, he's 99 and he's still, and now he's got another book that he was telling me about today that he's thinking about. So he's engaged with life and he has his iPad and he's a good reminder that, you could have bumps in the road of your life. He was captured, he was put to work in a factory making rockets that were dropped on the Allies in the war. And part of probably why he survived and was able to uh, get out of there was that he was useful to the Nazis. He was able to work. He was maybe like 18 or 19 when he was captured. So, whereas some of the younger people probably perished because they were too young and they just didn't have any use for them. He was, able-bodied, he was young, he was probably energetic, and he had enough sense to know if I can do this work well for them, I might stick around. So he's a good inspiration for me, and I think for other people who've read his story about perseverance. And he lost everything. His parents he was separated from his parents. His sister was killed. He came out of there having some relatives that survived, but he really had to rebuild his life. And he came to New York and got training and met a lovely woman who he talks about so dearly, his beloved wife, Marta. I wish I had met her. She just seems like a gem. And he he just credits so much of his success to her about how she was able to like type his papers in school and just gave him the encouragement to do it. So I feel like he's he's an older gentleman, of course, but he's still participating in life, which is wonderful. And for me, I look forward to going to visit him. And then when I leave, I always feel warmth, and I feel like, he brings up me as much as hopefully I bring him up.
So you're speaking to the value of these programs. Any anything else you'd like to add about why people who are listening to this should get in touch with Self-Help to learn more about this? Because it seems like such a valuable program.
Well, in addition to the friendly visitor program, they also have coffee house events where members from different boroughs come and have social events, which I haven't participated in yet, but I know they have them. I feel like it's the kind of volunteer work that you can do on your schedule. Like, let's say you're someone in your 30s and you have a full-time job and you can't do something during the week. You can set it up so you can request someone who might be open to having a visitor on Saturday. It's really like a small commitment. I've spent maybe like an hour to 2 hours with them, and it takes a little time to get out there, but I look forward to it because I know that it means a lot to him to have company. He has two sons, one who lives in Michigan and one in Japan. So they're always speaking via FaceTime, but of course, with the distance, they don't get to visit him that often. So I feel like he's someone who enjoys company. He has someone who comes in and helps cook his meals for a couple of days a week, and a woman who helps him with his novel and other support services. He has physical therapy. But I feel like when I come in, I'm just there to like listen, to talk. We're not trying to like get him up on his feet to walk, or, we're just it's a more of a pure experience, I think, for both of us.
And I know you said this earlier, but please repeat it for any of our listeners who want to learn more. Where should they go?
Yeah, the website is selfhelp.net. And I would encourage people to look up the website. There's a lot of different information there. If someone has a relative who was a Holocaust survivor, this organization has many services, not just friendly visitor programs that help support Holocaust survivors. And there's thousands of them in New York. I mean, at some point we're not going to have them with us. And Albert's probably one of the older ones because figure if you got out of the war in 1945, most likely you were 15 and above. So, we can all do the math. They're not going to be around that much. So it's important that, people who find passion in that subject have a way to help them. And there's also the Witness Theater. I would try to find that because that was really moving to me. I think people would find the theatrical programs very interesting. They work with like a theater coach who helps, develop the stories and give it a structure. But they were very moving. And I saw two different ones, one at the JCC, Manhattan, the Jewish Community Center, and one at the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
And there's another performance coming up that I know about. With that, Robert Stein, I want
Is
to thank
there?
you. Yes, there is.
Okay.
So, Robert Stein, I want to thank you so much for appearing here on the It's in Queens podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
In the interview, Robert talked about Witness Theater, which is a powerful intergenerational program that brings together Holocaust survivors and high school students to share stories of survival through theater. Through a year-long process, students and survivors form deep connections, culminating in a moving live performance where students portray their survivors' real-life experiences while the survivors narrate their own histories. Now, this year's performances may not be in Queens, but you should definitely check them out. They will begin on Yom HaShoah in April and continue into early May. And of course, all performances are free and open to the public. If you're looking for something else to do this month or really any month, we have you covered here at the It's in Queens podcast. Rob Mackay is with the Queens Economic Development Corporation and the Queens Tourism Council. And each and every week, he highlights some of the more exciting events that are happening in Queens. Here's this week's report.
Hi, Jeff. Let's try to appeal to your taste buds this week. The Indonesian Food Bazaar is back on Saturday, March 1st from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Try to imagine a huge room. It's actually a basketball court full of Indonesian food and beverage makers. Some come from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia to sell their products at this monthly banquet. And going along with the food, there's all kinds of crafts and performances, tremendous outfits, and it all takes place at St. James Episcopal Church, which is in itself a beauty at 84-07 Broadway in Elmhurst. Indonesia consists of about 6,000 islands with more than 600 ethnic groups. So the food, of course, is very diverse, but it has major Chinese and Indian influences. And of course, it's where the term Java came, which we use for coffee. Of course, they've got the best Java in the world. If you think about it, Jeff, it's a tropical area surrounded by water. So there's plenty of dishes with coconuts and pineapples and curries, along with plenty of seafood options. All right. Thank you, Jeff. See you next week.
Thanks, Rob. That's just a few of the things happening in Queens, and there's so much more. So you want to know what they are? Well, here's where you need to head. Right over to the It's in Queens website, and that website address is itsinqueens.com. And by the way, if you're interested in more business news, how to help your business or family members, well, then make a point to visit the QEDC's website at queensny.org. And when you're there or when you visit the itsinqueens.com website, well, sign up for their newsletters. That way you get notified about opportunities and events right in your inbox. Now, by the way, when you visit any location in Queens or when you're just walking around Queens this time of year, despite the cold weather, snap some photos and make a point of tagging us. Use the hashtag #It'sInQueens when you post on Instagram or X. And who knows, your photo could become our photo of the week. I'm your host, Jeff Simmons, and that's it for this week's It's in Queens podcast.